they can't figure that out because they don't have the conceptual apparatus within the canon law to do it. What they have to do is they have to go back to theology, see what Aquinas and what Augustine had to say about it, and say this has kind of structural theological influence. A guy used to teach over in the canon law school here, a guy named Bob Kennedy, used to refer to canon law as structural theology. And so it could really fit in if we were to do that. The second kind of way of looking at marriage is the essential properties: unity, indissolubility. A third way is we talk about the ends of marriage. That's having children and taking care of one another. Each of these perspectives looks on the constitutive elements of marriage. Each of these elements in the history has been considered as one of the reasons that we can call marriage null. The foundational canons of marriage are the next thing we want to look at. There are 111 canons dealing on matrimony, more than on any other of the sacraments. I wonder why. It's like the most important thing that we face in pastoral ministry, isn't it? Marriage and things connected with marriage. What do people come in and knock on my door about? Not anymore, thank you very much. What did they used to come and knock on my door about? Well, sometimes about their kids. And some terrible things about their kids. One couple stopped coming to our church because their son, when he was a junior in high school, figured out that he was gay, and they figured they couldn't come to the church anymore. I said, figuring out you're gay is like figuring out you got green eyes or blue eyes. It's not a big deal. But because of their experience with the church before and because of the embarrassment they just didn't come back. So usually it's about the kids, or it's about the spouses, or it's about loss of job and support for the family. But it's usually something that's connected one or another way with marriage. So why 111 canons? That's why. It's really so important. The foundational canons on marriage, we're going to talk about stuff like the nature of matrimony, and here's what Canon 1055 has to say. Wonderful definition. The matrimonial covenant, not contract, covenant. Strangely enough, these guys that are writing the thing go out to lunch a lot. And so they are going to use the word covenant 3 times. And then they're going to fall back into the contract language. But here, in the beginning, the matrimonial covenant by which a man and woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole life, which is ordered by its nature to the good of the spouses and the procreation of offspring, has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament between the baptized. And that says a lot of the stuff that we saw in the history. Why covenant? Why not contract? Well, covenant expresses a sacred reality. Contract, essentially secular in nature. Covenant expresses a personal commitment of the spouses. Contract has wound up focusing its attention on what happens when consent is given. That very minute that consent is given. Covenant kind of is willing to look at the way that consent gets spilled out over life. A term that's used to describe this thing where the husband and the wife give themselves to each other in this way of life. Another term that's used for this is something that comes right out of the Roman law, and it's great. It's a consortium vitae. A consortium. What's a source? It's a dice. It's a die. And the husband and the wife cast their lots together. Let the dice fall where they may. And they're together, through thick and through thin, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death. Consortium vitae. That's out of Roman law. And the church picks up on this, and marrying it to the notion of marital love, says this is the way that love gets lived out. Isn't that nice? And the Code of Canon Law actually talks about this. The goods of marriage continue to be in place. The sacrament of marriage continues to be in place.
That question is, does the lack of faith touch the covenant? Of
Boy, aren't you good? Look at what you brought up. What a great question. Okay, this is really important because Pope Benedict brought this up. What happens if we say marriage is a sacrament? But remember, sacraments are sacraments of faith as well as sacraments of the church. And what happens if there's two baptized people who don't give a hoot about the church, who don't believe in God, who don't believe in the sacramental system, who don't believe that the church is a sign and instrument by which this unique point of meeting is arrived at between the will of the Lord of history and the faith of men? But they don't believe in any of that stuff. Can somebody who lacks faith receive a sacrament?
Yes.
Well, babies. But we say, babies, they have, that's imputed to them. But Benedict wants to know if adults lack faith, and they actually say, oh, this is, I'm going to go through the sermon, I'm going to do a contract thing, but no sacrament thing for me. This is crazy talk. Are they validly married? And Benedict raises, we don't have an answer. And so what Benedict raises is we talk about the bonum sacramenti, which is permanent. And then he talks about the bonum, this is his language, sacramentalitatis, the good of sacramentality. And if this is lacking, and if sacrament is so significant to the perdurance of marriage that it's not there, can we say that this is something that has kind of sacramental validity within the church? And Benedict doesn't know. He says, it's something worthy of investigation. Good question. Have you ever thought about that before? Yeah. I mean, pastors have to think about it. Because you get these kids coming in, and one of them at least has no connection with the church whatsoever.
But if it's more than a contract, and it is a covenant, the state of being a covenant, it would seem if the person who doesn't have the faith but really does care for that person and goes to commit to that person, it's a catch-22.
That becomes the other piece of it. And the other piece of it, but can marriage be also what it always is between two pagans, which is a wonderful natural reality that is ordained of God.
Right.
So the question here is, if it's not a sacrament, what effect does it have in the church?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other question is, if it doesn't have effect in the church, does it still have effect within, as Jesus says in Matthew, in kind of the first order of creation? From the very beginning, God made them male and female, and for this reason, so you can't, what God has joined together. So at that first level, is that sufficient to bind them? And this is the area. But if it's not a sacrament, it's not a sacrament of the church, does this mean that it's going to be like a marriage between two unbaptized people, or one baptized and one unbaptized, where this thing called the Pauline privilege or the privilege of faith can take effect and the church can grant a divorce? That's the area where it is. So he's not talking about the validity, he's talking about the dissolubility. Yes.
Is if that's the case, then can a shrewd Catholic polygamist go from pagan wife to pagan wife and just
Yes.
keep going on until he's done?
Yes, in fact, we have that history in Africa. And in the 16th century, the church says, enough is enough. Here's how it's going to be. It's going to be your last wife or your favorite wife. No more. Okay, yes.
So I'm just thinking about the other sacraments. For example, the Eucharist doesn't require faith for validity, right? It doesn't.
No, for what do we call that? Not for validity.
Right.
But
So,
for,
I mean,
for enrichment.
right. So is the belief of the recipient of the sacrament of marriage, is that constitutive of the sacrament?
Yeah, well, that's
That's
the question that Benedict is raising, and I think it's a valid question. Is it just in terms of the goods of the sacrament, just the fruitfulness of the sacrament, or is it the very fact of the sacrament? If I'm absolutely lacking in faith for the sacrament, so this is all nonsense. Now, when I go to the Eucharist, I can be distracted and things like this. If I say it's all nonsense, there's Eucharistic reality, the realistic reality of receiving the body of Christ. If a pagan receives the body of Christ, and this is going back to Augustine, does he receive the body of Christ? Yes, because there's this reality that we use the language later on by the time of the 10th century, the 11th century, and then into Trent, real, true, and substantial. So it's really there. The presence of Christ is really there, and my faith has nothing to do with that reality. Let's take a look at confirmation. Absolution. Those other sacraments where we don't have that real, true, and substantial reality. And I think that's the area where Benedict might be thinking. But it's just a open question. It is really cool. So, that's the question that shows up on our charts there. And now, what makes a marriage a marriage? Why, it's consent. And what's marriage consent? Just like we heard in the council. A covenantal reality in which the man and the woman mutually give and accept each other. Each other. Who can get married? Why, anybody can get married, unless that person is prevented by law. Who might be prevented by law from getting married? We'll talk about that when we talk about impediments. Well,
But I have a question.
yes, yes.
How that would affect now with homosexuals being able to get married by law?
15, 20 years ago, I go to a cocktail party in Princeton. People wouldn't know what to say to the priest. You know, here I am with the collar and all a bunch of whatever. And they would always be, well, do you think priests should marry? Back then, 20 years ago, you'd say, well, if they love each other. No, that's not a joke anymore. We'll be talking about that when we talk about kind of things that sometimes you can fake consent, sometimes you're forced to consent, sometimes there's kind of a defect in consent because you like your patza, sometimes it's because you haven't thought it through enough. Sometimes with homosexuals it's going to be maybe because they can't do the stuff that we're asking people to do, part of which is having the possibility of children. So can we do a same-sex marriage in our churches? No. This little crazy parish that I was pastor in a place called Baptist Town. I was back a couple of years ago. It was Christmas time, and there was a couple I hadn't seen for a while. They'd moved to North Carolina, and said, "Oh, Betsy and I haven't seen you, but we wanted to tell you that we got married." A woman told me that, and she wasn't trying to put her thumb in my eye. You know, she was trying to say, we're married, sharing our joy. So I said, okay, if when are you going to be up again? He says, when the snow goes away. We'll go out, we'll have lunch and stuff like that. And so I bought them a gift, and I took them out to lunch at the Black Bass Hotel. And I went around the area where I am in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, trying to find a greeting card for them. For a same-sex. At that time, it was very... Didn't dawn on me I could have driven 10 miles going over to New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is... It's like gay-friendly forever, and bought a card in any drugstore. But anyhow, we did that. But here's the other thing that I knew. It was one of those moments of enlightenment. I knew that were I to say to them, oh, by the way, you can't take communion in the church, the parish community would have taken me behind the woodshed and would have had a conversation with me. The parish community would have done that. If anybody gets theological studies, there's an essay in the current issue of Theological Studies by the two bad boys who are writing about sex and marriage, Saltzman and Lawler, Todd Saltzman and Michael Lawler. And it's called Catholic Doctrine on Divorce and Remarriage, a Practical Theological Examination. And they start talking about how does the community receive this message. And in Baptist-town, I had to figure out how would the Catholic community receive this message were I to turn these people away from a community of faith, fellowship, underlying fellowship, and worship. And they would have beaten me up. So, I don't know. There it is. But this is a very, very interesting piece. You can take a look. It's just this current issue. There's only one copy. Where's the church way in this? If there's a Catholic there, then the Catholic can say, you got to get married. For non-Catholics, in the bad old days, it said, well, we really have control over anybody who's baptized, but we're nice guys and let them do what they want. Now we say we don't have control over them. So it's only Catholics that we try to have control over. And actually, we only try to have control within this Code of Canon Law of those who are part of the Latin Rite. Some canonical jargon, I don't know what this is worth. Matrimonium ratum, you're married, no sex, yet. Ratum et consummatum, married, sex after marriage. Matrimonium putativum. That's the important. Looks like a marriage, quacks like a marriage, waddles like a marriage. Everybody says it's a marriage. But what happens if the woman says, I really like my figure. I work out, I exercise. And if you think I'm going to put on a bikini with a baby bump, you're crazy. If you think I'm going to get stretch marks, you're out of your mind. And she has in her, I'm not going to have babies. Doesn't tell them. They're fine about not having babies. Oh yeah, let's get settled, let's do this. But she's never going to have babies. Looks like a marriage. Walks like a marriage. Well, it's not a marriage. Putative. What happens if the guy is just immature? And you think, oh, I love him, my love is going to change him. Yeah, well, and it doesn't. Matrimonium putative. The reason I bring this up is what happens if down the line somebody in a putative marriage gets divorced and it gets annulled? What does this do with the status of the children? The definition of legitimacy within the 1917 Code is any child who is conceived within or born of a valid or a putative marriage. The 1917 Code had a lot of things you couldn't do if you were illegitimate. I had to get a dispensation because I was illegitimate. My parents weren't married by a priest. Okay, before I could be ordained, because he is an SFA. And I could never be a bishop. Thank you, Jesus. The new code has the juridic model construct of legitimacy in it, but there's no restrictions on illegitimacy that's contained. There's no You can be ordained, you can be this, and nothing, okay? So it's just in there. But once again, it's born of a valid or a putative marriage. So very often people who are getting annulments have this question, well, what about my children? Born of a putative marriage, they're legitimate. Back in the old days, that married who would get the farm, or who could get ordained to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
Do you know, Father, do you know the code right offhand of where legitimacy is? I asked that question because my daughter, that's the first thing, I have not gotten any money because she believes that she would be illegitimate.
Oh, let me see.
But Monsignor, how about children of a father or a mother that they had a relationship before and were never married at a church? Then
Try that again now. How does that work?
children or a child from a parent.
Parents
that
were
was-
never married.
Yes,
Oh.
from a different relationship.
Like, I was in a relationship with Sally, and somehow or other I get the kids, and then I marry Mary. What about those children? Are they legitimate? Are they illegitimate? Well, they're illegitimate, but you can ask the bishop to legitimate them. And he signs a piece of paper.
And it's useful to point out, secular law, it considers them legitimate. I mean, somebody can verify this, but there's that whole business about how there's no such thing as an illegitimate child in secular law. The farm needs to be split with all the kids regardless of whether,
Yeah, is that right? It's fallen from the secular law?
I'm pretty sure.
So it's just natural children, just by
Right.
her
Whether or
statement.
not, they still get part of the farm.
Okay,
That's what the whole thing's about anyway.
Canon
Okay, here you go.
Thank
1137.
you.
Thank you.
Children conceived or born of a valid or putative marriage are legitimate. Thus spoke the canon lawyers. There it is, 1137.
And the putative is when.
Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, seems to be a marriage. Everybody calls it a marriage, a big reception,
Right,
done in front of the bishop.
but it's not a marriage for a reason other than the fact that they were the children.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it was conditional, okay.
Okay, we're going to take 10 minutes, but one question before we break, because it's another hour. There's about 15 minutes gone by.
What about the rights and restrictions according to canon law of all the other children that were born, let's say Sally got taken advantage of at a party?
Okay, and I'm the father of Sally's child.
No, doesn't know who it was because she doesn't remember what happened.
Okay, well, she has his child.
She has
And now she's-
nobody in particular's child because she was raped.
But she's got a kid that she's trying to raise?
And the kid wants to become a priest.
Nothing, no problem now. Hey, in our seminary, we have guys who have been married and divorced.
Yeah.
Right now, we have 3 guys who have failed marriages, who are moving ahead to become priests.
I'm just wondering, the rights and restrictions due to the concept of legitimacy.
Okay, I gave you the definition of legitimacy. In the 1917 code, there are restrictions. In the 1983 code, there are no restrictions. Illegitimacy places no restrictions on your standing in the church.
Thank you. I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
So there's really no such thing as illegitimacy in the church? as
Well,
far as
they
what the
just
child
quoted
is?
that. And you know why they put some of these things in? Hey, Luigi, it's time for a break for lunch. Okay, let's put this in and let's move on. Really?
Yeah.
It's either that or trying to prove the love for Jodie Foster, but I think it's probably the latter.
Bob, it came up at a conversation that in Baltimore, I heard about, it was true, that there was a guy applying to the seminary whose parents were 2 men.
Oh, yeah.
And,
No problem.
you know, somebody's like, can he get ordained? Why not? It's not.
There's no problem canonically. The problem there is formational.
Some people, you know.
The problem there is formationally, because one of the big formation issues now is we're dealing a lot with this as family of origin.
Yes.
SHIP is the magic acronym for formation in the seminary. Spiritual, human, intellectual, pastoral. The human thing is the hardest one to get right for us. And when the human thing isn't right, we find very often there's something tricky in the family of origin.
The same in marriage, family of origin is big one.
Mm. Yeah.
But then I would recommend that people stay, if you're not coming to tonight's NACLAM conference, go ahead and come, because, I mean, I'll register for tonight. Because the keynoter speaks to this very issue, that the family of origin issues need to be addressed, be resolved. Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah. If not, read the book, Healing Family Tree.
I want to take a break now, and then I'll come back. And what I want to do, now we set everything up, we can really run through very quickly the parts on annulments and what that means. And how we have to be careful not to use the word nullity when we really mean invalidity.
Okay.
Nullity means, hey, we've never been in marriage. Invalidity means this thing that looked like it didn't have effect in the church because it wasn't in front of a priest and two witnesses. Final shot, family of origin. My father was 3 times married, dead at 37. My mother was the second of his 3 brides. And with his 3rd marriage, there are 3 children. We're all family. We hang out together. But I'm the only one of my father's 4 children not divorced.
At least one of you got it right.
Let's come back at 3:15. Then we'll go till about 5 to 4. Then we'll have a little.